To the tense standoff in Portland, Oregon, new clashes tonight. Protesters facing off against federal agents there, despite the objections of the mayor and the governor. And now President Trump is reportedly threatening to send federal officers to Chicago. ABC's Kana Whitworth from Portland tonight.
Tonight, reports that federal agents may soon deploy to Chicago come as Portland is facing what could be its 55th straight night of protests. Overnight, demonstrators trying to break into the federal courthouse.
It's just before 3 o'clock in the morning here in Portland. Things are still going. There's so much tear gas in the air that my eyes are burning.
David, the protests start out peacefully here every night and then gradually turn into chaos.
CNN's Josh Campbell is joining us from Portland right now. So what's going on, Josh? What are you hearing?
Yeah, Wolf, we're continuing to see the showdown between protesters and local officials and federal officials. This is now going on for over 50 days. Every night in this location where I'm at right now, there have been protests, some of them turning very violently. Let me just give you a sense of what's taking place. Over here across the street, you can see, Wolf, this fencing that has been up. This is around this federal square. Every night, this fence is torn down by some of the protesters that gather here, and then in the daytime, the federal government will come and then put it back up. What's changed overnight, something that we haven't seen here in this area, is what's behind me, Wolf. They have reinforced steel now, this fencing that's outside of the federal building. You can see behind me there's a lot of graffiti. This is a site of some of that defacing that we've seen. This is an area where this is often turned to destruction. Now, as a result of this, some of the protesters, those who have turned violent, were told by law enforcement have been the subject of investigation. They've been going out trying to identify the agitators. A lot of people here in the community want answers, but this standoff continues, Wolf, between, again, local officials and some of these protesters and the federal government. Finally, we know President Trump has continued to use this as a political issue, talking about surging resources into Portland, talking about the failed leadership here that's allowed these protests to continue. He's really using this as a political football. He has his own officials at the Department of Homeland Security in line. They continue to attack local officials. City officials here tell us that they want the federal government to leave so they can then address the protesters. A very tenuous situation that continues here in Portland and will likely continue tonight, Wolf.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch with you, Josh. Thank you very much.
Breaking overnight, federal police fired tear gas at protesters in Portland, Oregon, as some of them began disassembling a fence around the federal courthouse. This was the scene overnight. The acting Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. Ken, it's great to have you on. Thanks so much for being with us. Overnight,
good morning.
You told the Washington Post, quote, the agency, the Department of Homeland Security, will maintain a heavy presence in Portland and send reinforcements to other cities if violence surges. What does this mean exactly in terms of other cities, and what can we expect in terms of a federal law enforcement national deployment?
So the violence in Portland was going on for 4, 5, 6 weeks before we got intelligence about planned attacks on federal facilities, where we backed up the Federal Protective Service, which is responsible for protecting the courthouse there and other federal buildings, with other DHS law enforcement components. And we've been there ever since, wearing, by the way, the very same uniforms every day, and the crowd has seen them every day, marked and so forth. But if we get the same kind of intelligence in other places about threats to other federal facilities or officers, we would respond the same way. And we have a responsibility. The Department of Homeland Security is charged with protecting these facilities. And when they're unusually threatened, we advance extra resources. So it's really as simple as that. And as we've seen all around the country where there's solid cooperation, which is a question in Portland because of how the civil authorities there want to run things, we see more peace advanced as responsible policing advances as well.
Let's break that down in two parts. The mayor of Portland actually says, you said the federal officers went in there after several weeks of violence. The mayor there says the violence was actually improving and on the verge of being almost completely better, but the federal law enforcement deployment made it worse. Your response?
No, look, he has to say something. He's kowtowing to a local political base. And if you look at the day by day, literally every single day since late May, they've had violence in Portland. The idea that our advancing other agents in the July 4th weekend somehow escalated violence is just, it's literally just a talking point.
Well,
for
we
the
are
mayor.
hearing that, by the way. We are hearing that.
And by the way, well, wait a minute.
We're hearing that from locals as well. We're hearing that from local press as well. We're hearing that from local press as well.
The intelligence we had was correct that weekend.
Just based on what you see, is that unusually?
No. I don't base things on one. The reason we came there wasn't because of some future video. The reason we advanced other DHS law enforcement officers is because there was intelligence locally generated that there were going to be threats to federal facilities. Maintaining an appropriate response is an ongoing obligation. I grant you that. And that's for all of us. But at the same time, the threat to those federal facilities and officers did materialize in the July 4th weekend and has maintained since that time. And as long as it does, we will maintain our presence. When that violence recedes and those threats recede, that is when we would ratchet back down to what I would call normal presence, defending and protecting federal facilities. That is regularly present in Portland and has been at that courthouse for instance, since 1997.
The question is about the appropriateness and the proportionality of the response, and also the people carrying it out. You say they are CBP, Customs and Border Protection agents assigned to the Federal Protective Services. They are in camouflage. They have patches on. Based on my study of the video, it's hard to see. It's hard to make out the patches to find out where they're from. But I'm going to read to you from a Homeland Security internal memo obtained by the New York Times on the training of these officers. It says, quote, "The highly skilled tactical teams assigned to support the civil unrest and riots do not specifically have training in riot control or mass demonstrations." Moving forward, if this type...
Yeah, that is not correct. And I mean, you see CBP, if you remember in the last year or two, rushes at the border, where you saw crowd control CBP officers, really OFO officers, deployed. It's the same training, and the people there in Portland have that training from CBP. We have other officers there doing
Why was this DHS memo written? I didn't write this memo. This is your own department that wrote this memo.
Neither did I. Neither did I. Neither did I. It's a big department, 240,000 people, and that is not correct. And FPS, in addition, because all of these agents from outside the Federal Protective Service are there to support FPS in its mission, they have not only been cross-designated, they got additional training from FPS related to their authorities with respect to protecting the facilities. So not only do they have the base training, they also have the training necessary, which is largely legal training, which all officers get, to understand the jurisdictional boundaries under which they're operating as people in support of FPS.
One of the videos that has caused concern, and Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon disseminated this as well, was of a man being put in an unmarked van on the streets. I wonder if we can show this video so people can see. These are the CBP agents that you were talking about approaching the man, taking him, and then putting him in an unmarked van here.
NLG will get you out.
Now, locals there were asking for the officers to identify themselves. There are people who have described this is not me, as Orwellian, being put into an unmarked vehicle, being driven away by officers who don't identify themselves.
Use your words.
What's your view of this action?
So first of all, unmarked police vehicles are so common it's barely worth discussion. I mean, literally every police department in America has them and uses them. We are no exception. That's one. Two, the video you see was after a 3-block foot chase in which the individual had been identified as matching the description of someone assaulting a federal officer about 1 hour prior to that video that you see. And the person was put in the van. You obviously saw the surrounding crowd a little bit there, which was a bit of a dangerous situation, which is why the individual was moved away. And from the time they detained him until the time they released him was under 10 minutes. And in that time, they also identified themselves. By the way, they identified themselves to the subject they picked up. They did not identify themselves to the crowd, and nor do they feel any obligation to do that, nor will you see that commence. We interact with the subjects we're dealing with, and that's it.
I got to let you go.
They determined, all right, well, they determined that was not the person who did the assault and released him.
I do have to let you go, but there's a U.S. attorney, a federal U.S. attorney, launching an investigation into the practices out there, and now members of Congress are calling for the same, and inspectors general, you're nodding your head. Do you intend to cooperate with these investigations?
Yeah. With the Inspector General investigation, which is perfectly normal, we run our own investigation of every single use of force, every single one, by the Office of Professional Responsibility. So this is matter of course for us, and you bet we will. Of course we will.
Ken Cuccinelli, great to have you on. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be with you.